Hearts of Iron 4. It's a game, I think, and it's the only game I can think of that allows you to literally play as the one that shall get this video demonetized. Abdulaziz, obviously. I mean, do I really have to spell it out for you? Don't think I haven't seen your posts on Paul, Jacob? Surely all of these claims you've made about how you could have done it better weren't all just mere posturing. I capitulated France and the United Kingdom by 1937. My source? Who needs a source when you have these trips? Hearts of Iron 4 was released by a cute little Swedish studio by the name of Paradox Interactive. They make games that typically have the benefit of not being very difficult to explain to people when trying to describe what they're all about. Because, for most PC gamers, the two words paradox and game next to each other in a sentence are more than enough to conjure up nightmarish memories of maps, diplomacy screens, and statistics spreadsheets. Though for those who aren't quite cultured enough to be privy to these intrusive thoughts, I think you might find this little niche corner of the strategy gaming pigsty, within which we saw people trying to simulate the Ukraine conflict mere days after it first occurred, to be quite intriguing. Hearts of Iron 4 was my first Paradox game, and maybe the first grand strategy game I ever played, depending on whether or not you consider Civilization 5 to be grand strategy. And that makes a lot of sense, because if there's anything useful I want to convey in this video, it is that Hearts of Iron 4 is a great entry point for anyone who has ever considered picking up a grand strategy game. At a glance, a new player may be overwhelmed by how much is going on at any given time. However, HOI 4 isn't actually as complex as some of Paradox's other games, or a lot of other games of this nature. But don't let that fool you into thinking that this is some sort of baby game. There are a lot of different mechanics at play here, and I can proudly tell you, without feeling even a touch of shame, that there are some parts of this game that I still don't understand 100%. Almost 500 hours in. Alas, welcome to the Country Select menu in Hearts of Iron 4. This is where the magic happens, because even before you start a new game proper, there are already a lot of things you have for consideration. Apart from their waifu status, different countries start off with different political situations, starting technologies, ongoing conflicts, just to name a few, all of which have great effects on how you will play. On top of this, you have what I will call your roleplay considerations, because Hearts of Iron 4 is a game best suited to testing your vast library of revisionist historical theory. Want to find out how World War II would have ended if Russia turned fascist halfway through? Or if the United States had joined the Allies from the very beginning? Hearts of Iron 4 holds the unequivocal, undebatable answers to your questions. Make sure to state your conclusions as pure facts and logic on your favorite message board of choice. So already, what I have said so far may have got some cogs turning in your head about the vast meme potential of this game. But one must first learn to walk before they can start a coup in Mexico. Or so the saying goes. So how should a new player go about with their very first HOI 4 campaign? Play the tutorial, perhaps? The HOI 4 tutorial is decent. It doesn't take up too much of your time, and it explains some of the game's fundamental mechanics through gameplay. It also points your attention to this tab here that alerts you to decisions that need to be made. It's a very important part of the game to keep track of. However, once the tutorial ends, it lets you keep going. As Italy. This is one of the nastiest troll moves I've seen pulled by a developer in a long time. Italy is not an easy country to play for beginners. It controls a lot of territory in Africa that you have to worry about, has a sizable navy that a new player will have absolutely zero idea what to do with, and it doesn't start off with that many factories. And all of this is also coupled with the fact that you would then be forced to have to play as Hitler's bald child. No thanks, Paradox. By far, the best option for new players is to play as Germany. But Hub, I hear you say, you must be trolling. I've watched a documentary or two. Doesn't Germany lose the war? How could they be the best country for beginners? And that, my friend, is because Germany in Hearts of Iron 4 is overpowered. Whilst recording Germany gameplay footage for this video, I was able to defeat Poland, France, and Great Britain through a naval invasion all before the United States ever got involved, by the end of 1940. And the thing is that I wasn't even trying that hard. Case in point, I neglected to protect my coast and got naval invaded halfway through my invasion of Belgium. I am by no means a good Hearts of Iron 4 player, and yet all of my games as Germany look like this. Now, whether or not this makes Germany a balanced country is besides the point. Personally, I think that playing against them as the Allies gets a little bit ridiculous sometimes. Be that as it may, the choice of faction for a new player is very clear. There are several different factors that make Germany so easy to play for new or inexperienced players, a lot of which I will go through as I explain some of the game's mechanics in just a minute. But even before going into any of that, there are some things about Germany that give it a lot of advantages that don't really need a lot of explaining. Geographically, Germany doesn't have very many concerns. It shares a fairly small, easily defendable border with France, its most problematic neighbor. Germany also starts off with a lot of territory with plenty of space for building factories. I'll get to those in a minute. All of this territory is close together, with no random colonies in Africa to worry about, meaning that you can focus all of your manpower on your main war effort, leaving your cucked husband to deal with whatever the fuck this is. And finally, though it does have a sizable coast to worry about, the vast majority of it is in the Baltic, and can be easily protected. But let's not waste any more time. We have a world war to win. Welcome to 1936 Germany. Let me just mention that you can choose to start the game in 1939 if you wish to get into the action a little quicker. However, I think that the building up to the war is one of the most fun parts of Hearts of Iron, and frankly, I don't really know anyone who doesn't start the game in 1936. Now, any successful campaign in Hearts of Iron really boils down to just one game mechanic: building a metric shit ton of factories. In fact, factories are so important in Hearts of Iron 4 that having a certain amount of them is what determines your status as a major power. Civilian factories are the most important of the two types. Without civilian factories, you cannot construct military factories, which means you can't equip your army. Which means that your playthrough amounts to roughly 30 minutes of wasted time before you inevitably get invaded and capitulate. As it turns out, simply throwing millions of starving, unarmed teenagers at the enemy wave after wave isn't as great of a strategy as the Soviet Union would have liked you to believe. Because of this, military factories are pretty much tied with civilian factories in terms of importance. A single military factory has a base production output of 4.5, which can be modified with different research options and national focuses. Some types of equipment cost more output per unit to produce. For example, a single military factory will produce much more infantry weapons than it would medium tanks. Makes sense. But what does that mean for you? A young, budding war criminal. Basically, assign a ton of military factories to equipment that you really need. I recommend making sure that your infantry has rifles, but who am I to judge? So now you have a basic understanding of the fundamental building blocks of any successful nation. However, what is a civilization without scientific progress? Mathematics? Agriculture? The written script? Who needs any of that when you could be putting your brightest scientists into the research of modern Tank 47? Keeping on top of your research is going to be a vital part of your campaign because of the numerous bonuses they can provide. One thing that the Hoi 4 tutorial gets right is that it forces you to do research in the industrial and engineering tabs, which are extremely important as they allow you to do things such as construct more buildings in provinces, faster building, and research. Make sure to always be researching something out of these two tabs when possible, using your remaining research slots for whatever else you desire. There are many other building types in Hearts of Iron 4 that I could talk about, such as fuel silos, bunkers, and airports. Dockyards are essentially military factories that are only able to produce ships for your navy. But we chose to play as Germany for a reason. Strong navies are for weak armies. And with that, I've explained the very basic idea behind the production side of things in Hearts of Iron. But we are not ready to unpause just yet. There is one more thing that we need to address first. The national focus tree. This was probably the most daunting aspect of Hearts of Iron for me when I first started playing. I mean, just fucking look at it. However, I am here to tell you that the national focus mechanic in this game isn't as complicated as it may first appear to new players. What helped me to understand what this was even meant to represent was thinking of the national focus tree in terms of historical events. For example, one of the first options on the German national focus tree is the remilitarization of the Rhineland, a fairly significant part of the pre-war period. National focuses drain a certain amount of political power points per day, which is a resource that I haven't mentioned yet. It's probably the closest thing the game has to some sort of currency, as you can spend it on hiring political advisors or to perform some specific actions in the diplomacy menu. What this means for national focuses, though, is that the length of time it takes to complete one of them is always the same no matter what. Though national focuses tend to take 70 days to complete, you may come across some that take more or less than that, usually depending on what sort of rewards they give. And my god, can these rewards be delicious. Adds 6 civilian factories? Yes please. 1 year research boost for medium tank technology? Don't mind if I do. And that's not the only sort of thing that you can achieve with the focus tree. Anything from war justifications to changes in government popularity can easily be achieved through this game mechanic. The German focus tree is a big reason for why this country is so easy to play. Whereas other nations will sometimes grant you the odd factory here and there, none of them really come close to the amount of good bonuses that the German focus tree provides, especially in the early game. The 6 civilian factory option is a good example, but what I didn't show you is that the very next focus after that one grants you 6 more civilian factories. That's a potential result of 12 civilian factories essentially for free in just 140 days. It's a little excessive in places honestly, but there aren't that many good options to choose from in the late game at least. Decide on your first national focus and unpause the game. We are officially progressing through time. Now, with a typical Germany playthrough, there are 2 important things you want to pay attention to. That being the Spanish Civil War, and deploying enough manpower to qualify for some important national focuses down the line. Because there is a lot of territory that Germany can take for free just by having a big enough army. You can see that with the Anschluss focus right from the beginning, which has the requirement of having 500,000 active units in the field. To deploy new units into the field, you will need to select from a division template. You'll generally want to do that after you've acquired a bigger stockpile of equipment, and I will talk more about these division templates later. But once you've selected the division type that you want to train, select a valid province where you would like them to spawn. To train multiple of the same division type, click Add Unit to add another division to the list. Finally, this number here determines how many times this whole order is going to loop. If it's left at infinity, once these divisions are trained, a new one will automatically go into training. If you only want one set of divisions, set this number to 1. However, the Spanish Civil War comes first, and it will allow me to talk about some more of the game's fundamental mechanics, because we're not going to be getting directly involved in any real conflicts anytime soon. This is both a good and a bad thing. It's good because we don't really have enough manpower or equipment to wage an all-out war against one of our unsuspecting neighbors. However, getting into a war early on would allow us to generate a lot of army and unit experience very quickly. But would you look at this? As the strong, moralless dictatorship that we are, we can send up to 2 of our divisions to serve as volunteers in the Spanish Civil War through the game's diplomacy menu. Because what a waste it would be if we couldn't capitalize off of the misfortune of others. The diplomacy menu is another one of those features that seemed much more menacing to me than it really is when I first started playing. Because when it comes down to it, there's really not that much you can do with it in Hearts of Iron 4, especially compared to some of Paradox's other games. We can see what I mean by looking at nationalist Spain as an example. Notice just how much of these options are either great or that are crossed out, showing that they will not accept your offer. This is what diplomacy is going to look like with pretty much every country in the game, leaving you with the ability to justify war goals against nations that are not in your faction, after which you unlock the ability to declare war, improving relations, which will gradually increase the target country's opinion of your own, and boosting party popularity, which may result in the target nation changing to your form of government after some time. Countries controlled by the AI in Hearts of Iron 4 have a system that weighs the positive and negative outcomes of many of these other diplomatic actions, such as being invited to join a faction or allowing foreign troops to enter their borders. And if the AI isn't at war, and especially if they are ran by a different government type than yours, they will never accept offers of these types from the player. On top of this, you really don't have to pay any attention to whether or not you can perform one of these diplomatic actions in the diplomacy menu. Because the second the positive attributes outweigh the negative, the country will just ask you if they can join your faction, displaying an icon in your decisions tab. So as long as you're paying attention to that, then you won't miss out on very many of these important diplomatic actions. Send volunteers is one that you will have to pay attention to manually though. And since we can only send a maximum of 2 divisions to nationalist Spain, we might as well send in the big guns, the mighty Panzer II divisions. Now that our 2 tank divisions have arrived to help out with the nationalist war effort in Spain, I can finally begin to talk about the last major game mechanic that I will be showcasing in this video: the combat. There are 2 ways to go about combat in Hearts of Iron 4. In this case, where we only have 2 divisions to worry about, you can treat the game as you would a typical real-time strategy game. Simply select the 2 units you have and right-click them on a province to order them to move. If that province happens to have enemy divisions present, your units will enter into a battle, represented by this bubble. Long story short, if the bubble is green, you're winning. If it goes red, you're losing. Thanks for listening to my TED Talk. Now, there are many factors that come into play in determining the outcome of a battle, and many of them are far beyond the scope of this video. Just bear in mind that even things such as the type of terrain and the weather in a province can have a decisive effect on your divisions. However, each of your divisions has these 2 green and brown bars that are important to keep track of, those being your division organization and fighting strength, respectively. The latter is much easier to explain. Fighting strength is purely determined by how fully equipped your division is. If you're producing enough equipment for your divisions to use, and you have enough manpower to replace any casualties you have sustained in combat, then your fighting strength will stay at 100%. If, however, you struggle to produce enough equipment, this fighting strength will decrease as your divisions sustain casualties, making it much less effective over time. It's all well and good if your divisions have great stats on paper, but if you don't have enough equipment to supply them with, then you might as well be using divisions that are a little bit worse stat-wise, but that you can actually supply properly. Division organization is a little more tricky to explain, and in fact, it may be easier to understand in terms of unit morale. Please allow me to refer to the Paradox Wiki in search of a good explanation of this mechanic. Organization is the readiness of a division to perform combat, the willingness of a unit to either continue attacking or to continue holding the province that they are defending. Essentially, battles rely on completely draining the enemy division's organization, or morale, instead of completely destroying them, which mirrors how actual warfare works. Therefore, it is important to try and not engage in combat if your division organization is low if you want to have the highest chances of victory. Organization will deplete during combat, but it will also do so if you order your divisions to travel a long distance, or if you send them into an area that isn't connected to a good supply network. So it's important to plan ahead and not get caught lacking when all of your units are stationed on the other side of the continent. However, with just 2 divisions in Spain, you won't run into too much trouble with either supply or organization for the most part, and you'll find yourself racking up a lot of army experience in the process. This resource can be used for 2 things, the first being unlocking doctrines. Out of your friends, which one are you? Mobile warfare? Superior firepower? Or perhaps mass assault? It's important to plan ahead in terms of what sort of military you want to employ, so that you can best accommodate it to one of these 4 doctrine trees. The mobile warfare tree goes well with Germany, as it provides you with a lot of buffs to armor, organization, and attack. Though if you instead want to focus more on infantry, you may want to go with either superior firepower or mass assault, depending on how much spare manpower you have at your disposal or how much production you are willing to assign to support equipment such as artillery and anti-air guns. The other way in which you can spend army experience points is through editing and creating your own division templates. This is a little more on the advanced side of things, and probably something that new players shouldn't worry about too much, especially with Germany, which starts off with very serviceable division templates to begin with. However, just be aware that if you want to start producing and fielding medium tanks as an example, they will not be deployed anywhere unless you assign them as part of a division template somewhere. I recommend just sticking to light tanks for your first playthroughs for that reason, as those are already part of the default armor division that Germany starts off with. Eventually, the Spanish Civil War will be concluded. And so far, I've shown the simple way of inflicting human suffering upon your enemies. However, try commanding hundreds of divisions by individually selecting them and ordering them to attack specific provinces, and you'll quickly find yourself in the same position as the character you're playing as, only about 7 years sooner. There's got to be a better way. Hearts of Iron has one of the coolest systems for controlling multiple units without the need to micromanage that I've ever seen. You can group together units of any type and assign them to an army down at the bottom of the screen. Up to 5 of these groups can then be united under one army group. You can then further assign generals to each individual army as well as the army group. This comes with the downside that you're then limited to 24 divisions per army and 5 armies per group by default, which can increase as your generals gain experience. However, generals have specialized bonuses that you would be wise to take advantage of, as they apply to all of the divisions under their command. Once you have done that, instead of directly controlling your divisions, you can instead create front lines along the borders of other nations, as well as offensive lines into them. Once a front line has been established, your army will assemble itself along it, spacing itself out in a way that will let it both defend it properly, as well as being in an advantageous position for an assault. When the time is right and you've designated both a front line and an offensive line, one may simply commence the assault, and then watch as your pawns carry out your operation. And thus, with the defeat of Poland and the beginning of a worldwide conflict, I have covered all of the very basics of HOI 4. Obviously, this video doesn't cover everything you can do in this game. There's an entire aviation and naval aspect for one, as well as numerous little mechanics to be aware of, such as factory production retention and how a unit's stats play into combat in the game. However, I think that everything I've covered so far is enough to get one started on their very first campaign. Hearts of Iron is one of those games that is best learned through experience. One game you'll find yourself unable to defeat even the weakest enemies you come across because you miscalculated just how many military factories you really need to supply your infantry with enough rifles. The next, you'll do a lot better, until you get naval invaded out of nowhere and capitulate within a matter of minutes. It's rare to find games nowadays with as much replay value, as many different possible playstyles, and as many new things to learn every session as Hearts of Iron 4 has to offer. It's a game that I find myself going back to consistently throughout the years, and I will most likely continue to do that. However, this video isn't over yet. Because sure, I've shown you what makes Hearts of Iron such a great game as it is. But where are the memes? Hub, you promised meme potential. Well, let's get into that. When you start a new game in Hearts of Iron 4, there is an option you can select that says Historical AI Focuses. If selected, the AI of other countries will try to follow a sort of historical order when selecting what focus tree to complete. This works for the most part. Even though the AI tends to do a decent job at doing what it's meant to do in this mode, you will occasionally run into random, weird events throughout your playthroughs. This can range anything from an AI-controlled country getting involved in a conflict that they shouldn't have, to countries suddenly changing government types because the wrong focus tree was selected. But what happens if AI historical focuses is turned off, I hear you ask? In this mode, the AI is unleashed to complete any national focus in any order they please. Germany is usually the least affected by this, as its focus tree is very rigid. There's no way to change out of a fascist government in the vanilla focus tree for Germany, for example, and at some point they will commence World War II by attacking one of their neighbors. But when it comes to a lot of other countries, your bet is as good as any. One thing you can know for certain though is that you're going to be in for a lot of border gore. Paradox has somewhat of a reputation of creating a lot of downloadable content for their games. At its worst, for games like EU4, it can cost upwards of $300 to own every bit of DLC that's been released up to this point. Hearts of Iron 4 is nowhere near as crazy in this regard, though it's not exactly a saver menu burger from McDonald's. I have a few things to say about this. The first is that I personally do not own any DLC for Hearts of Iron 4, and considering my playtime, I think that says a lot about the quality of the base game. One thing that I appreciate about the constant development of this game is that a lot of the newer core mechanics, such as supply zones and resistance suppression, that came about as a result of some of the newer DLC, was also added to the base game of Hearts of Iron, meaning that you don't really miss out on that much if you're just trucking along with the standard edition like I am. Second, a lot of the actual expansion DLC centers around adding new focus trees to countries that would otherwise have a default one in the vanilla version. Those may be a decent purchase for someone with a lot of hours in the game, but the next section in this video will show you a better free alternative. And lastly, if you do want to play around with all of the DLC but don't feel like spending 100 quid, you can instead subscribe monthly to gain access to all of it for a fairly reasonable price. I think the fact that this is sort of necessary to have says a lot about Paradox's current DLC model, but nonetheless, I think it's a decent alternative. Hearts of Iron 4 has mods. A lot of them, in fact. These range anything from slight changes to the game's UI, all the way to complete overhauls. One of the most popular mods for HOI 4, and one that I frequent the most, is Road to 56. Although it's generally designed to be used in multiplayer, Road to 56 completely redesigns the focus trees of almost every country in the game, allowing for a great deal more alt-history memery than the base game. This mod alone is probably the main reason for why I've never bothered with buying any of the game's DLC. But maybe you're in the market for something a little bit different. Want a mod that imagines a world where Germany came out as the victor of the Great War? Or maybe you just want to take part in the Great War? Or maybe you want a mod set in the Fallout universe? Or perhaps you want to play a version of Hearts of Iron that is set in the 21st century. Millennium Dawn deserves a little section of its own in this video. Remember how I mentioned that there were people out there simulating the Ukraine conflict not long after the war first broke out? This is the mod that they were doing that on, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was part of the reason for why the 2017 start date is no longer supported by the mod developers. Well done, guys. It's a very ambitious mod that adds things like an actual economy system, where you have things such as national debt to consider, as well as completely reworked research and focus trees that allow you to get up to some interesting activities. It's a mod that flies over my head a little bit with its complexity, but it's extremely ambitious and made really well. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about Hearts of Iron 4. And if you've sat all the way through to the end of this video, but you're still not convinced whether this game would be your cup of tea, then here's some channels I'll recommend for you to check out. I'll have links to some of my favorite videos from each in the description below. As always, I've been Scav Merchant Hub, and
I can see him sitting in his bunker in the end. I think I understand the man.
I want you to subscribe to me
Scav Merchant Hub
on YouTube. Thank you, cringe. Bye.